My name is Ryan. I'm 26, and last month I found out my parents had been taking money from my grandmother that was supposed to be mine. Not once. Not as a one-time thing. Every single month. For over 6 years. I only found out because of a stupid comment she made while passing me the salad during lunch. We were at her place, just the four of us, something casual on a Sunday. She looked at me and said, "You must have saved up a good amount with all the help I gave you through college." I actually laughed out loud. I thought she was joking. I said, "What help?" And she looked at me like I was messing with her. Then she got quiet, and I watched the mood in the room shift in real time. My mom suddenly stopped eating. My dad adjusted his chair. I didn't understand what was going on yet, but I knew something was off. I asked her again what she meant. She said, "Well, I've been giving your parents a little every month since you moved out, just to make things easier for you. Books, rent, whatever you needed." You didn't know? I just stared at her. I couldn't even respond. Because no, I didn't know. I spent 4 years in college working nights, eating whatever was on sale, skipping out on trips with friends because I couldn't afford to go. I thought Grandma didn't want to help me, and I never held it against her. I just assumed she had her reasons. Meanwhile, my parents were collecting money in my name and never said a word. Not once. They watched me stretch every dollar like it was the end of the world and never mentioned the fact that there was money coming in, money that was meant for me. My grandmother looked so confused. She kept glancing back and forth between me and my parents, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She said, "I thought you were using it for rent." That's what they told me. I only wanted to help. I asked her how much she was sending. She said it started at $200 a month, then eventually went up to $500 when I moved to the city. I did the math right there at the table. Over 6 years. That's more than $30,000. 30 grand that I never saw. And it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that they let me struggle, let me go without, while pretending they couldn't afford to help. Every time I asked for a little help with textbooks, or when my car broke down, they made it seem like they were barely holding things together, that we were all just doing our best, and they were sitting on money that wasn't even meant for them. My mom finally spoke up. She said, "We used it for bills. Things were tight. We thought you were fine." That's what she said. "We thought you were fine." I wanted to scream. I wasn't fine. I was working 2 jobs, skipping meals sometimes, turning down unpaid internships that could have helped my career because I couldn't afford to take them. And they knew that. They knew exactly what I was dealing with. I was transparent about everything. I didn't hide it. They told me to hang in there, to be responsible, to push through. And the whole time, they were collecting money behind my back and never once considered telling me. Not even when I moved out and started living paycheck to paycheck. I asked my dad if he ever thought about saying something. He just looked down and said, "It didn't feel like our place to tell you. It was between your grandma and us." The rest of the lunch was dead silent. My grandma didn't touch her food after that. She kept her hands folded in her lap and didn't look at my parents again. I was sitting there, staring at my plate, trying to piece together how many moments in the last few years now felt completely different. I remembered when I told my mom I was thinking about dropping out because I couldn't keep up with work and school. She told me to tough it out. Said there wasn't really anything they could do. I remembered when I had to sleep in my car for a week after my first lease fell through and I couldn't afford a hotel. I remember calling them, and they said they were in a tight spot. Meanwhile, they were pocketing hundreds every month with my name on it. I felt like a fool. When we finally got up to leave, my grandma pulled me aside near the door. She looked like she wanted to cry. She just said, "I didn't know, Ryan." I swear, I never would have agreed to that if I'd known. I believed her. I could see it all over her face. The confusion, the guilt, the anger. She asked if I needed anything now, if she could help somehow. I told her no. Not because I didn't need it, but because in that moment I didn't want another cent from anyone in that house. I felt used. I felt like a name on a check. I hugged her, told her I'd call later, and walked out without saying a word to my parents. They didn't even try to stop me. They just stood there, quiet, like they'd already decided it was better to let me cool off than to explain anymore. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes before I could even start the engine. I wasn't crying. I wasn't yelling. I was just numb. like my body didn't know how to process the shift. It felt like something cracked open in my brain, and now every conversation I'd ever had with them came with a new layer. I thought about the holidays where they told me not to worry about gifts, that they were cutting back. I thought about the months I delayed payments on my student loans because I couldn't make rent and didn't want to ask for help. And all this time, they had a safety net they never shared, one that was meant for me. I don't know what felt worse, the fact that they kept it from me, or the fact that they didn't even seem to think it was a big deal when I found out. That night, my mom texted me. Just a simple message. Can we talk soon? No apology. No explanation. Just that. I didn't answer. I didn't know what I'd say if I did. What do you even say to something like that? Hey, thanks for pocketing thousands while I lived off canned soup and worked night shifts during finals. I wasn't ready. I wasn't even angry in a loud way. It was this quiet kind of betrayal, the kind that settles into your stomach and makes everything feel heavier. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the way my dad looked down at his plate, how my mom tried to justify it, how my grandma looked absolutely broken when she realized what had been going on. And I knew things weren't going back to normal after this. The next morning, I called my grandma. She picked up on the first ring. Before I could say anything, she apologized again. I told her she didn't have to, that it wasn't her fault. I could hear the frustration in her voice, though. She kept saying, I should have asked more questions. I should have checked, and maybe she should have. But I didn't blame her. She was trying to help. I asked her when the payments stopped, and she said, they haven't. I still send it. That hit me hard. Even after I'd graduated, moved out, got my own place, she still thought she was helping me every month. And they never once said, hey, he's fine now. You can stop. They just kept taking it. I didn't even know how to respond. I hung up and just sat there staring at the wall. There's something different about this kind of betrayal. It's not someone yelling at you or doing something in a moment of anger. It's slow, quiet, like someone slowly pulling the rug out from under you over years until one day you look down and realize you've been standing on nothing. That's how it felt. And I couldn't stop wondering what else I didn't know. What other things they'd kept from me in the name of protecting me or managing things behind the scenes. I always thought we had a decent relationship. Not perfect, but decent. And now I was realizing that most of it was probably built on whatever version of reality they thought was easiest to maintain. Later that day, I got a message from my dad. It was longer than the one from my mom, but still didn't say what I needed to hear. He wrote that they never intended to hurt me, that they were just trying to keep things stable during a rough time. He mentioned job issues, medical bills, and the stress of having to make decisions quickly. I read the whole thing twice, and nowhere in it did he actually apologize. Not once. It was all explanation, no accountability. He even said, we figured you were doing well and wouldn't need the money as badly as we did. That line made me sick. They didn't just hide money from me. They actively decided I didn't deserve it. That what I was going through wasn't important enough to justify using it as it was intended. They made a choice, every month, to put themselves first while letting me think I was on my own. I didn't answer him either. I wasn't ready. Instead, I started going through old emails, old texts, trying to find the point where this all started. I found messages from freshman year, asking them for help with books or utilities. My mom saying, we wish we could, but money's just too tight right now. Meanwhile, a deposit from grandma had likely just hit their account. I felt like an idiot for believing them. But also, I was angry at myself for never asking more questions. I never once asked grandma directly. I just assumed she wasn't involved. I didn't want to seem greedy, so I kept my head down and did what I had to do. And I realize now, that's exactly the version of me they were counting on. The quiet, responsible son who wouldn't make noise, who wouldn't question things, who would accept it, no matter how unfair it was. A few days later, I went to visit grandma in person. I brought her flowers and groceries, just to show up with something. She seemed relieved to see me, like she wasn't sure if I'd keep my distance after everything. We sat at her kitchen table, the same one from that lunch, and talked for a long time. She told me how she started sending the money after I moved out because she remembered how hard it was for her when she was my age. She didn't have much, but she wanted to give me something to make things a little easier. I asked her why she didn't just send it to me directly, and she said she didn't want to step on my parents' toes, that she thought they'd know best how to manage it. I didn't say much. There wasn't anything to say, really. I just nodded and thanked her for caring, for trying. Before I left, she handed me an envelope. It had a check inside, a big one. She said, "I know it doesn't fix everything, but I want you to have this directly. No middleman this time." I told her I couldn't take it, but she insisted. I could tell it meant something to her, not just the money, but the act of giving it to me. It was her way of reclaiming something, correcting something. I took it, not for the money, but because I didn't want to rob her of that gesture. On the drive home, I felt something shift. I wasn't angry at her anymore. I believed her. I believed that her heart was in the right place. But I also knew I couldn't go back to how things were before. Not with my parents. Something was broken there. Not loud or dramatic, but deep. The kind of damage that doesn't come with an apology or a family dinner to patch it up. That weekend, my mom showed up at my apartment. She didn't warn me, didn't ask. Just rang the buzzer and waited. I almost didn't let her up, but part of me wanted to see what she would say face to face. When she walked in, she looked nervous, like she wasn't sure if I'd slammed the door in her face. She sat down and immediately started talking about how hard things had been, how they never meant to betray me, how they thought they were doing the best thing at the time. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt, but none of it made a difference. I told her, calmly, that the money wasn't even the biggest issue anymore. It was the choice, the pattern, the fact that they let me struggle while lying to my face. She started crying, said she didn't know what else to do. And I said, "You could have told me the truth." She kept saying she was sorry, over and over, but it didn't land. Not because I didn't think she meant it, but because it was too late. You can't unlive those years. You can't rewind the days I spent breaking down in a parking lot after work because I didn't know how I'd cover rent. You can't undo the silence when I asked for help and they told me no, when they had the means and just didn't use it for me. She asked if we could move past this eventually. I told her I didn't know. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just didn't want to fake it. I couldn't sit across from them at a dinner table anymore and act like things were fine. Because now I knew what had been happening underneath the surface all along, and pretending it didn't matter felt like lying to myself. In the weeks that followed, I kept my distance. I didn't block them or cut them off completely, but I stopped answering right away. I stopped sharing things about my life. I started treating them like distant relatives instead of parents. It wasn't a conscious decision. It just happened naturally. The trust had been drained out of the relationship, and once it's gone, everything feels different. I used to call them when I got good news or when something funny happened during the day. Now I tell my friends, or I write it down and keep it to myself. That's the part no one really prepares you for. The slow, quiet grieving of a relationship you thought was solid. Not because it ended in some huge blow-up, but because you finally saw it clearly for what it was. I told a couple close friends what happened. Their reactions were a mix of disbelief and anger on my behalf. One of them said, "Man, that's theft." Straight up. I hadn't even thought about it that way until he said it. But he wasn't wrong. My name was used as a reason to collect money, and I never saw a cent. Another friend asked if I'd ever confront them more directly, maybe even ask for it back. I said no. Not because they don't owe me, but because it wouldn't change anything. It's not about the money anymore. It's about the years I spent thinking I was alone when I wasn't. It's about what it did to the way I see them. And nothing they could give me now would make that go back to how it was. That part is gone. At one point, my dad sent me a message with a screenshot of an old email from my grandma, where she mentioned the monthly payments. I think he was trying to prove something, like maybe it was her idea, or that she wasn't being totally clear about what the money was for. But it didn't do what he thought it would. If anything, it made it worse. Because in the email, she literally said, "Use this for Ryan, whatever he needs." It couldn't have been more direct. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. He never brought it up again after I pointed that out. He just stopped responding. And that kind of silence, to me, says more than anything else could. They knew. They just chose not to care enough. I think that's what it really comes down to. Not just that they lied, but that they watched me struggle and chose silence. It's one thing to make a mistake. It's another thing to watch someone you love suffer because of it and do nothing. I've stopped trying to understand their reasoning. There's no version of this that makes it okay. I don't need to hear about their bills or their excuses anymore. I've accepted that they're not who I thought they were. That the parents I built in my mind, the ones who'd always have my back, didn't actually exist the way I believed they did. It's not an easy thing to admit, but there's a weird kind of peace in finally seeing the truth, even if it hurts. A few weeks later, I saw my grandma again at a small family gathering. It was awkward at first, mostly because my parents were there and we barely spoke. But when I sat down next to her, she reached over and held my hand without saying a word. That small gesture meant more than any apology. We talked a little during dessert, just about random things, work, friends, nothing heavy. But when I stood up to leave, she said, "You're stronger than they realize, you know that?" I didn't respond right away. I just nodded. It was the closest anyone in the family had come to acknowledging the weight of what had happened. And even though it didn't fix anything, it helped to hear that someone saw it. That someone knew I'd been carrying more than I let on. Since then, things have been quiet. I still get the occasional text from my parents, usually something neutral like, "Hope you're doing okay," or "Let us know if you need anything." But the truth is, I don't need anything from them anymore. Not financially, not emotionally. That chapter closed the day I found out what they'd been doing. And as strange as it sounds, I felt more stable since then. Like I finally stopped expecting them to be something they're not. I still have questions sometimes. What would have happened if I had never found out? Would they have ever told me? Would it still be going on today? But I try not to spiral too far down that path. Because the answers don't matter as much as the fact that now, I know better. I know who I'm dealing with. And that changes everything. I've thought a lot about whether or not to cut them off completely. Some days it feels like the cleanest option. Just move on. No contact, no explanations. But other days, it feels too final. Not because they deserve a place in my life, but because I'm still processing what that place even is. Right now, we're in this weird limbo. I don't reach out, and they don't push. Birthdays come and go with short messages and no calls. Holidays are quiet. And honestly, it's fine that way. I've built something on my own now. A life where I don't depend on anyone who doesn't show up for me when it counts. It's lonelier sometimes, sure, but it's also real. And I'll take honest loneliness over fake support any day. There's this moment I keep going back to in my head. It was during my last year of college. I had just paid rent late for the third time in a row, and my landlord had left a notice on my door. I remember calling my parents in a panic, asking if they could help just this once. My mom sighed and said, "We're barely keeping up ourselves." I remember hanging up, sitting on the floor of that tiny apartment, and thinking, I just have to get through this alone. That memory used to make me feel proud, like I had survived something by sheer willpower. Now it just makes me feel used. They let me break, while pretending they were broken too. And that's the part one don't think I'll ever get over. Not the money, but the fact that I was never truly alone. They just let me believe I was. Eventually, I told my older cousin about everything. She's always been the one person in the family I felt I could talk to without getting judged or told to just let it go. When I finished explaining, she sat in silence for a while, then said, "Honestly, I'm not surprised." I asked what she meant, and she told me that when her mom, my aunt, was in a rough spot a few years ago, she heard my parents had taken a loan from my grandma under the impression it was for a medical emergency, but the money never made it to the hospital. She didn't have proof, but it made her raise an eyebrow. That hit hard. Not because I needed more reasons to be angry, but because it made me realize this might not have been some isolated incident. It could have been a pattern. I started wondering how many other things they'd justified in private by saying it was for someone else's good. That conversation shifted something for me. I stopped thinking of it as a one-time betrayal and started seeing it as a window into who they really were when no one was watching. And that hurt in a different way, because I used to defend them. To friends. To myself. Whenever they disappointed me or let me down, I'd always say, "They're trying their best." But I can't say that anymore. Because their best involved lying. Their best involved taking money meant for their kid and acting like they were powerless to help him. That's not someone doing their best. That's someone choosing comfort over truth. And once you see that clearly, there's no unseeing it. There's no going back to the version of them you built in your head to feel safe. I wish I could say there was a big confrontation or that I got some emotional closure, but that never happened. Things just sort of faded. No dramatic final conversation. No apology that fixed everything. Just a quiet unraveling. I still see them sometimes, mostly at family events. We make small talk. It's civil, but the connection is gone. There's a wall now, and everyone feels it. My grandma still checks in often, and we've grown closer since that day. She never tried to defend them, never made excuses. Just stood by me, quietly, in her own way. She even rewrote her will to make sure everything from now on is handled directly. It shouldn't have taken all this for that to happen, but at least it did. At least one person saw the damage and tried to do something about it. People talk a lot about forgiveness, especially when it comes to family. Like it's this thing you owe to people who raised you. But I don't see it that way. I don't think forgiveness should be expected just because we share DNA. My parents made a series of decisions that showed me exactly where I stood in their priorities. And when it came down to it, I wasn't even on the list. They had chance after chance to come clean, to help me when I needed it, to say, hey, this is what's going on, let's figure it out together. They chose silence every time. And now I choose silence, too, but on my terms. Not out of helplessness, but out of peace. I've built something for myself without their help, and that means more to me than they probably realize. I've thought about sharing this story for a long time. Not for sympathy, not for validation, but because I know I'm not the only one who's been lied to by people they trusted most. It messes with your head. It changes the way you see the world. You start to question your own memories, your own instincts. But I've learned that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be real. Sometimes it shows up quietly, in the middle of lunch, when someone thinks they're making a harmless comment. And in that moment, everything shifts. You see the cracks in the stories you were told. You realize how many years you spent protecting people who were never protecting you. And that hurts. But it's also freeing. So no, there was no final fight. No grand confrontation. Just a sentence from my grandma that opened a door I didn't even know existed. And once I walked through it, I couldn't go back. I don't hate them. I'm not bitter. I just know better now. I know who they are. And I know who I am because of it. That part, knowing I made it through anyway, is mine. And no one gets to take that from me.